As you say, a warm welcome to everybody, and this is our first session since the autumn break, and it's in fact our first happy hour for the autumn series. We've got a really exciting programme which you can check out on our website. We're delighted that we are partnering again with Winckworth Sherwood, and thank you, Charlotte, for your support. I think this is the third we've held with you this year, and we certainly have created a real buzz at each one, and I'm sure this is going to be no exception. Today's session, investing in ideal homes, we got, as Jerome says, a real great roundup of speakers. Please do feel free to tweet about them. You'll see on the agenda that's on the screen now everybody's Twitter handle, and please do share any points you've learned or any observations that you've made, because I know that a lot of these social media activities also help us reach a new audience and enable people to participate with the LIN in different ways. What you may not know is since the last happy hour back in June, July, there's actually been two new ministers, one for health and one for housing. So we know that Sajid Javid is now joined as the new Secretary of State for Health, and Michael Gove in housing. But both have shown a commitment to housing with care, and we're really keen to build on that. And part of that is to demonstrate that there's a real business case for investing in supported housing with care to ensure that we have the ideal homes for an ageing population. So without further ado, I'm going to give a hand over to Charlotte, who's going to chair this afternoon's happy hour. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you, Jeremy. Good afternoon. My name's Charlotte Cook, and I'm a partner in the social housing real estate team at Winckworth Sherwood. We've always tried to have a groovy name for our sessions previously, but I hadn't thought of one until I came up with Charlotte's webinar, which I quite liked, but it's not all about me. Just a brief introduction to those of you who don't know Winckworth Sherwood. We're a full service firm, and we work with all aspects and all partners of the housing movement. So from RPs to developers, small and large, arms house charities, voluntary groups, for-profit and not-for-profit providers, as well as local authorities, the regulator, banks, investment institutions, and indeed the church. So hopefully we've got everything covered there. Should you need. And we're really, really pleased to be working once again with Jeremy and the HousingLIN, and for me to be chairing the latest happy hour session. So indeed the first of the autumn series. So looking out of my window, and it's still looking quite nice, nice blue sky out there. But you know, I think winter is coming. Will be with us shortly. Anyway, as I said, it's not about me, it's not about us, it's about the panel, and an illustrious panel that we have today. I'll ask each person to introduce themselves in a little bit more detail when they come online and before they start their presentation. But briefly, Karen Anderson from Homes England, the regulator, I'm sure you'll be very well aware of them. John Glenton from Riverside Housing Association, he's their Executive Director of Care and Support. Guy Glover, Director in the Property Funds team at BMO Real Estate. And finally, James Duncan, who is one of my partners at Winckworth Sherwood, who works in our Corporate and Funds team. Hopefully you'll agree that a super mix of people from all sides of the arena here, and always helpful to have a lawyer on hand, I would say. So today we're looking at things from both from a public and a private side, from commercial angles, and considering both best policy and best options for influencing supply, site and delivery questions. As Jeremy's alluded to, we're all very, very well versed nowadays in the need to invest in and deliver appropriate housing and indeed care for all within our society. And yeah, the needs of the ageing population have been much considered over recent years, even if, I daren't say it really, but government ears do appear to be a little bit hard of hearing at times. But we're all aware of the dynamics and the demands of an ageing population, hopefully living better and certainly living longer. And we also need to consider how all of this impacts across all sectors of society and not just occupying their own homes. To my mind, our government is a little bit fixated on the desire for home ownership, and that's not always an option for everybody, and particularly in later life when further care may be a very real and necessary need and demand. Delivery also changes over time. We're seeing from our clients, so we've started with almshouses who've been around for centuries. Some of our RPs likewise have been around for centuries, with that, from that groundswell of philanthropic Victorian reformers to the present day. And now, of course, we're seeing the change there, going from the not-for-profit providers to the for-profit providers, and also particularly within this sector, seeing the institutional investors coming on board as well. So RPs and providers have changed over time, as well as those funding and investing in the sector. So an awful lot of things going on, an awful lot of things to talk about. And so without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome my panel. And firstly, Karen Anderson, if I could hand over to you, tell us about the regulator.
Well, I'll start off by just clarifying I definitely talk for Homes England and definitely not the regulator. We separated off a few years ago, so Homes England is just about the development, not the regulation of housing. I will talk today about how Homes England is supporting options for later living. A lot of focus has been on affordable housing. I hear what you say, Charlotte, in terms of, you know, the government's focus on home ownership. But I think in terms of what we've done, we haven't done an awful lot under the tenures, and I want to try and help people understand what we are doing across the board in Homes England, including affordable housing. So if I can just move on, Jerome, to what I'm going to cover. I'll briefly cover who we are and then a bit of demographics, and then it'll really be about what we're doing, just to try and give you that. We've got a heck of a lot of slides to get through, so I'm only going to touch briefly on some of them deliberately. But there are a lot of slides there for you to refer back to if you want to. So in terms of who we are, we're the government's Housing and Land Agency. Where our parent department is the newly formed Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, with Michael Gove. And obviously we'll need to see what comes through with the new Secretary of State. And there's three main delivery arms within Homes England, and I'm going to cover each one off of those in terms of what we're doing. So that's Market Partners Places, which is the Directorate I'm in. There's our Investment Directorate, which includes loans and grants, and there's our Development Directorate, which is very much about the land side and building that out. So if we could move on a couple of slides, Jerome, I'm going to just touch on some demographics. You might have heard of some of these before, but I thought just to get us going, my focus right through this presentation is going to be about options, and that includes thinking about what's needed in different places. So you can see from this map that rural and coastal areas are ageing at the fastest rate. That doesn't mean the largest numbers. The cities and towns have the highest number of older residents, but their growth is going to be outnumbered by that of people of working age. These trends are particularly important for local authorities' finances, who will rely on active population in terms of the future revenue to provide some of the housing with support and care. So if we move on and just touch on unmet demand, the most current older people are homeowners, yet most of the work that we do, I've touched on before, is focused on affordable homes, which I'll go through later. So what more can we all do around right sizing, around flexible homes for all tenures? And then if we touch on demand again, the next slide, Jerome. Okay, in terms of mainstream housing, we need to be thinking of not just people who are currently in the social rented housing now, but the private housing, and very much including private rent. This social market foundation research, which the chart's taken from, and it's from HAPPI 5, shows that over the next 30 years, there'll be a need for an additional 360,000 specialist rented homes, 12,000 a year possibly. And that's to meet the needs of the older private and social renters that are or will be living in unsuitable housing. So it's just trying to think that we're building for the future. Housing has to last a long time. We have to future-proof it. So if we can move on to what Homes England's doing about it, and the next slide again, please. So in terms of Market Partners Places, we work very closely with local authorities and combined authorities. Now there's a list of things there, the kinds of questions that we ask them and ourselves when we're working with them. And the things we need to think about, well, what does that local market intelligence say about the population? Are there issues and challenges around ageing? What do their local strategies and local plans say? And are they struggling to move forward with their ambitions? And can we help them to maybe broker discussions with partners who might be able to help them deliver? And if we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to use the Newcastle Helix Future Homes scheme as an example. And this is a scheme on a 24-acre Newcastle site. It's just part of the scheme. And the proposal is for affordable homes to suit all generations. The Future Homes project is looking to design and build a community of 66 homes with this easy walking of the city centre and all that it offers. And it's part of Carbon Homes' strategic partner programme with Homes England. Now, as well as maybe some affordable housing grant to support the delivery of the affordable homes, they are talking to the Combined Authority about potential help with site remediation and sewer diversions. They've also been using Homes England's developer partner panel, now the dynamic purchasing system. So what I wanted to get across here was that sometimes Homes England will work with partners, but the local authorities, the combined authorities, and it's very much a collaboration to try and get schemes brought forward. For this particular scheme, the Future Homes Alliance, the community interest company formed between the Newcastle University, Ryder Architecture, the local elders council and others, has been driving the scheme forward in terms of design and everything. Now, this is going to be part of a 700 home within the site. There's also some significant university buildings, and Homes England's has an office within one of the blocks there. In the past, we've invested Housing Infrastructure Fund to provide a district energy scheme. So you can see all of the things which come together, which try and bring some of these schemes forward. The aim is for it to be an exemplar of sustainable urban living with flexible living space to suit residents' changing needs. So an example of that is going to be movable partitions, which can move around the building to be configured to meet those changing needs. There's also things to bring the different ages, the different parts of the community together, such as around mini allotments and green roofs. So if we move on, this is something that our Development Directorate are doing. And they've been involved in the Home of 2030 competition. This was supporting the various departments and organisations that you can see on the top right of the slide there. But the competition specifically included something around age-friendly and inclusive living. We were involved in writing the brief, in the judging panel, and post-competition we'll be trying to learn from some of these homes as they're built and share some of that experience. So the next slide sets out who the winners are. So that was Igloo Plus Home and Open Studio Connector Housing. And I've put in the bottom right corner there the link to where you can get more information about the competition and the winners, because there's some really innovative designs there which might get you thinking as well. And the next slide sets out what happens in terms of, well, you know, what next? So the two winners are working with Sunderland City Council on a proposal to deliver 6 show homes at their Riverside Sunderland site. There's an opportunity to learn from the design scheme at a construction phase through to the delivered product. And that it's a demonstrator scheme for business and consumer market. And it'll allow Homes England to adopt the design proposals and deliver the homes elsewhere with the benefit of a tested product. And that was key to us, that we're able to understand how this can be scaled up if at all possible. It's going to be a key feature of the Future of Living Expo in Sunderland in 2030. And I would suggest you look out or Google Home 2030 for Sunderland, and you'll be able to get more information about that as it comes forward. So the next slide looks at, well, what does the Investment Directorate do within Homes England? And this is around loans. And it's an area which we haven't done a lot of. And this case study in Watford was actually our first home building fund loan for something for the retirement living sector. Now, if you don't know about the home building fund, it's a 4.5 billion programme in total. And it's for building homes for sale or for rent. And it's preparing land for those homes. we can lend between 250,000 and 250 million for development or infrastructure costs, or contributing to them. It's for 5 homes or more, and it's for loans to SMEs, including housing associations. So if you are looking to do something which is more on the private side, or you're a local authority and you're aware of contractors who are struggling to bring things forward, do let them know about the fund. Now, this wouldn't just go to people as a matter of course. We would need to consider, you know, have the applicants looked at the market, the general market, and that they're not able to secure lending, and then we could start to look from there. But I just wanted to highlight this to you. Again, bottom right corner, there's some links for you to find out more information. And I'd be really keen for you to highlight the fact that Homes England can support loans for this kind of housing. So if we move to the next slide, you'll be more familiar with this in terms of our Affordable Homes programme. So our affordable housing team are also in the Investment Directorate, and they manage the 16 to 21 programme, which is now closed for new bids, because we now have the 21 to 26 programme, which is active at the moment. The third bullet down there gives a feel for the different solutions for different needs, again, options for different people. We will consider various different types of accommodation, and it's very much trying to provide what's needed in different places. We also look at different tenures, which will suit different purposes. So you'll see there we've got affordable rent, social rent or home ownership, including older person shared ownership. We're actively open for bids for continuous market engagement at the moment, and there's a direct aim within that programme to 10% of it to supported housing schemes. The photograph on this slide I wanted to highlight to you, because we're not always talking about huge developments. This is 2 homes in Rookup in County Durham, where there hasn't been any social housing of any kind built for over 50 years. It's a population of 300 people. And I think, as the Chief Exec said very succinctly, these bungalows might seem like a drop in the ocean to some, but to the families who will be able to live in this village, they will mean everything. And I just wanted to highlight that it's not just about big schemes. We will support smaller schemes, and particularly try and support rural development. So the next slide, I obviously didn't want to miss strategic partnerships. So the Secretary of State recently announced that we a commitment to invest almost 5.2 billion across 31 strategic partners. And I've put them up on the slide there, so you've got them for reference. So we'll be working proactively to co-develop joint business plans with the most ambitious partners to help us realise our joint ambition. And within that, we'll be actively exploring opportunities to deliver more older persons housing. We're interested in how the capacity and expertise of our larger partners can be harnessed and used to promote partnerships to deliver more specialist housing. So if you are one of those strategic partners, please think about that. And then just a few case studies to finish off on the affordable housing grant. So this is right. I wanted to just highlight that we do provide funding to support homes which are built for people specifically with dementia, as well as other general needs accommodation. Now, this scheme's in Manchester. It's a mix of affordable rent and shared ownership. It's a mixture of bungalows and houses. And the bungalows within the scheme are for people who are living with dementia. They're self-contained, promotes their independence, and they have various design features which I've included in the slide, which help with wayfaring and light and being able to benefit from the scheme's attributes. And then if we move to the next slide, we do a lot of extra care, and this is a really good example in South Gloucestershire, where again there's a mix of apartments for sale, shared ownership and rent, as well as a host of health and leisure facilities and things like the bistro and the village hall. So it's very much about trying to bring people into the scheme and create that village feel. And then I finally wanted, and I think I'm on time, I just wanted to cover a summary really in terms of, well, what is it that Homes England is seeking to do? So in terms of how we can invest in ideal homes, it's very much not just about the homes, it's the places that they are and the location that they are in. Exactly like it said in HAPPI 1, location is one of the key principles that we need to be seeking. It's about providing choice and options, so that's in terms of tenure, in terms of the property type, the level of support available, and thinking that everybody's different. Not everyone wants to live in a retirement community. Not everybody wants to live with people of different age groups, so it's providing that different choice to them. And then the last thing I want to say is that making the maximum of the new technologies that we've got. And I think it's a bit corny, but I put it in anyway. But I know that we want to be trying to provide happy places to live, which is a bit of a plug for Jeremy in terms of where the HousingLIN's going next. So I've got my contact details on the last slide, but you'll be able to refer to them if you need them. So I'm going to finish there. And I was told that I hand over to the next speaker, and that's going to be John Glenton from Riverside.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for inviting me to speak at today's event. I think my slides are about to come on screen next. So I work for Riverside. Riverside are a large housing association. Happy for the first slide, please. We provide 58,000 homes. And within our portfolio, around 10,500 sit within care and support, and around 5.5 are retirement living schemes, where we have over 200 sites providing homes for people over 55. So the next slide, please. And within our services, what we actually do at most of those sites is we have a team of retirement living staff delivering housing management and health and wellbeing services. We have a 24/7 helpline that we run ourselves as part of Riverside. We're developing RP, so a lot of the things that Karen talked about are recognised. We are on site building 2 new extra care schemes as we speak, and we've got several others in the pipeline. And the next slide, please. So in the UK, Karen covered this also, in the UK we've got an ageing population. And as we economists predict that the allocation of resources will become more and more of a strain. We've all seen the debate panning out over the news in recent weeks about how we pay for adult social care. This debate's been going on for a long, long time. But crucially, housing needs to be factored into the fact that we are an ageing population in the UK. And needs to be a priority, because housing that facilitates healthy ageing for older people is recognised as a key factor in determining both health and quality of life. As we live longer, we know that we're more likely to live with long-term health conditions and therefore are more likely to require some form of either support or care to help us to continue to maximise our independence and live as independently as we want to. We also know that as we get older, more of us are likely to live alone and experience the impacts of isolation and loneliness on our health. So we know there's a whole host of reasons why, to deal with the challenges of an ageing population, housing is a critical factor in how we support people to live well and healthy as we grow older. The next slide, please. We also know that as we grow older and we retire, we're more likely to live on a reduced income. So managing and maintaining and heating a large family home gets more challenging. And we know that for a significant number of people who are currently living in the private sector, when they retire, they simply won't be able to afford the rent on their privately rented home. And there's a report there up on screen from Lodbest about a rental housing for an ageing population. So we know that there's a time bomb around how we're going to respond to this. So significant numbers, Karen talked about some numbers of affordable rented homes will be required as we move forward, up to 12,000 new homes a year for extra care or sheltered housing. So this problem doesn't seem to be acute now, but as the years progress, as we age as a population, the need for specialist housing will become more acute as our population of older people continues to expand. So next slide, please. So what are some of the challenges? Some of the challenges for the UK, but also some specific challenges for RPs in the housing sector. So stigma. So for some people, moving into social housing still has an element of stigma, depending on the area, the location, but particularly if that social housing scheme is as part of a large estate or in a deprived area. So we know there's an element of stigma, particularly for people who own their own home. So selling up and making a decision to sell your own home, which is your asset, which is somewhere where you might have brought up your children, there's lots of conflicting factors why people wouldn't always want to do that, including the desire to leave the family home to their, to the sons and daughters. So we know that there's reasons why people choose not to. We also know that what happens all too often is that people leave it too late. They don't make a positive decision to downsize and move to a good quality retirement living scheme or apartment that's easy to maintain and easy for them to live in. They tend to move sometimes after a major incident such as a fall or following a serious illness, when choice and control is then reduced. So I think we've got some work to do in the UK around planning to live healthy and live well in an appropriate environment as we get older. I think there's the perception of retirement living, extra care, care homes. The general public don't often understand what we're talking about when we start talking about these different types of housing. And what some people say to me, certainly my old mum used to say to me, I'm not moving in one of those places. And people don't often understand what we're talking about, modern aspirational, apartments with balconies, etc. They think it's about living in a care home. So there's some work to do across the sector to help people understand actually what we're offering within the sector. Service charge. Now, service charge affordability is something that's a continuous challenge, and it's been perpetuated over recent years with a whole focus on building safety, which is obviously the right thing to do, but there's many pressures on service charge, and we need to remember within the sector that we have a fair number of self-payers, people who are paying from their own pension and their own funds. So affordability is something that we always bear in mind. And again, we've seen in the press about buildings, communal buildings, the leaseholders having to pay massive increases in service charge. As a sector, we need to manage that really carefully. And then development costs. Yeah, grant is available for retirement living schemes and extra care schemes, but sometimes making those services stack up as a development can be challenging because of the large communal spaces, because of the extra facilities, restaurants, hairdressers, etc. That can pose some challenges too. And then finally, mixed tenure developments. This can be, depending on the area, can pose some real challenges. Trying to sell some apartments within a mixed tenure development, we've certainly had some challenges. We've also had some real successes where we've been able to develop a core scheme, and around that scheme, bungalows for outright sale or shared ownership. That's tended to work well because you can manage the service charge much more more bespoke for those bungalows without having the hefty cost of the main central building included. So the next slide, please. So some of the things that we're doing to meet the challenges. I'm just looking for the next slide, please. So I'll continue. So we've decided here at Riverside 5 years ago, we decided to look at all of our retirement living stock and look at what kind of housing an ageing population would choose and want to live in, and what we needed to do to make some of our stock fit for purpose. So is the next slide there, Jerome? So that the next slide's not coming up, but I'll continue. So we decided to create a retirement living investment program, and we, rather than the traditional way of upkeeping social housing stock, we decided to take a different approach, and that was to refresh our existing stock. So giving the scheme a full facelift with new kitchens, bathrooms, windows, refreshed communal areas, corridors, etc. Working with interior designers so that the design features were compatible with dementia-friendly environments, designing with in co-production with our customers, but also having an eye for the customer of the future, remembering that the customers of today are always the customers of tomorrow. And some design features that we were able to incorporate was small kitchens and small living rooms could become an open plan area. And one of the challenges that came back, first of all, from some customer feedback, but also from some architect feedback. Well, no, you can't have open plan because people don't want the washing machine on during Coronation Street. Well, we were able to, well, you don't have to have the washing machine on during Coronation Street, but bathrooms, rather than having baths, had walk-in showers, and we could put the washing machine in the bathroom. So lots of dementia-friendly design features were also included. Is the next slide available now, please? No, well, I'll continue talking. So, so as well as refreshing and remodeling our existing services, we also took the time to look at how we deliver our operating model and moved away from the traditional one-person scheme manager within this retirement living setting to a team of people who would work across a range of services, so that there was different skills going into the service, and splitting the teams into health and wellbeing and housing management worked particularly well. We also have developed 8 brand new extra care schemes over the past 6 years, working towards the Sterling University Gold Standard Accreditation for dementia-friendly buildings, which we've achieved, on-site restaurants, hairdressers, specialist assisted bathing facilities, on-site care teams 24/7. And we know that not everyone wants this type of accommodation. We know that not everyone needs this type of accommodation. And what we've really tried to do is work with commissioners and housing departments to create a mixed range of customers, so that there are people living in those environments who have really low care needs, people medium right through to high. So you've got that community and an engaged customer base. And then moving on to health and wellbeing. So my slides still aren't working. But within our health and wellbeing activities, we do an awful lot of work collaborating with external partners. So using our communal facilities for people to come in and deliver services around understanding dementia, about, you know, exercising, armchair aerobics, move more for me, living well on a budget, all kinds of activities. We found those health and wellbeing activities have the added bonus of getting people out of their apartments and into communal spaces, making friends and chatting and talking and dealing with some of those in a really practical way, an informal way, dealing with some of those challenges around isolation and loneliness. The pandemic has thrown a whole load of challenges at us, and we were really fortunate that we were in a position where just before the pandemic hit, at the end of 2019, we were able to complete our Wi-Fi rollout to all of our schemes. So all of our schemes were Wi-Fi equipped in communal areas, and we've done a lot of work to get people online. So we're able to deliver some health and wellbeing activities online, and also send people links to virtual museum tours, virtual safari tours, but also deliver some support and training on how to connect with their families through Zoom, through FaceTime, all that type of thing. So lots of activities there. And then moving on to my final slide, and Karen also finished with assistive technology. So we know that life-enhancing technologies have a major part to play in the future. So one thing as standard that we have in all of our apartments currently is that we have movement sensors. So rather than the traditional morning call when someone would need to ring or check, go knock on the door to check that the customer was okay, we now have movement sensors. So the customers say to us what time they're usually up and about. So if they're usually up and around by 8 o'clock, if we haven't had a signal to say they've moved by 9 o'clock, we'll investigate. Or if it's 9 o'clock, we'll investigate by 10. And what customers tell us is they have a greater sense of independence. They used to be sat there with the coats on, waiting for the old warden to contact them. So that's added real value. But we also found during the pandemic in particular, where we reintroduced welfare calls, there's something about that human element, particularly when people were isolating and maybe the only person to speak to that day was our member staff. So that was really valuable. But in the future, it's about using technology. And some of the ideas that I've seen is even how can there's the telecare, telehealth, but also the talk around using robots to help with administering medication and things like that, which all seems a long way away. But I think assistive technology absolutely has a part to play in the future, and it's making sure that we don't forget that human interaction is equally as important, particularly for people who might have limited interaction with others. So that's my presentation coming to an end. I'm not sure what happened with the slides. I'm now going to hand over to Guy, who I think is the next speaker.
Thank you very much, John. I'll have to share my slides. If you can just hold on 1 second whilst I do that.
We do apologise for any inconvenience there. Thanks, John. I know that Jerome's PC froze during your presentation. I think we're back on screen. And Guy, over to you.
Thank you very much. Can I just say thank you very much for the invite today. It's great to be in front of so many people. I'd also say that I'm sort of honoured to follow Karen from Homes England, who will always have deeper pockets than private capital, and obviously in awe of some of the great work which John's been doing at Riverside. What I'm going to do today is just talk about BMO Real Estate Partners, how private capital can be a complementary approach to create and also invest in ideal homes, but it is working in partnership with registered providers, housing associations, and that's very much the approach we take throughout the organisation. So I'm going to cover off today who we are, what we can offer, our approach, very flexible solution, and a very brief summary. As people won't know us like you would know Homes England and Riverside, I'd just like to give you a very brief run through of this slide. Who are we? We've been around quite a lot. Peabody was originated 4 years ahead of our first investment trust launched, the F&C Investment Trust, some 150 odd years ago. And we operate a number of investment trusts in the UK, 10 currently, 3 with a real estate focus. We also have a significant amount of assets under management, what's known as responsible investment, which would be impact or ESG in investing. And we launched our first ethical equity product back in 1984. So we've been doing responsible investment for a very long time. And BMO Real Estate Partners also won't be a name particularly familiar with many of you, but we run about 6 billion assets across Europe, and approaching $1 billion in housing solutions. Most recent initiative have been teaming up with Home Group to launch a key worker housing solution, which we hope to roll out across the country on a flex rent model. So a very different model where we try and maximise the number of units within a scheme which can be let to key worker housing. What we're working on at the current time is working with an organisation called Social Income to create a new lease-based model for supported living or supported housing, but doing it in a different way. We want to do it in a sustainable, delivering high quality accommodation, but also create some positive disruption in the market. Obviously, you will know there's some names out there who are looking for very, very long leases and not causing issues with non-compliance for RPs. We have a totally different approach. What we've been doing is speaking to the regulator and have developed a regulatory compliant model. Part of that is we want to have a very sustainable, transparent rents agreed with the RPs. What we're trying to do with this short lease model, as we call it, is have the risk not resting with the RP. The risk should properly rest with the investor who owns the asset. The RP should quite properly look after the building and do what it's superb at doing, overseeing the building and also the care provider. And part of this is to deliver measurable ESG impact, which we do with all our responsible funds. So what are we talking about? What is our proposal? Well, as I mentioned, we want this better balance between the needs of the registered provider and the investors. So we have a very flexible leasing model with leases aligned to underlying care contracts. We also incorporate decommissioning break clauses. We realise that not everything works out for both parties, and therefore we have incorporated break clauses throughout the agreement. We spent a lot of time with the regulator talking through their requirements, and I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. But for us, by creating something which is the RP, with the RP design in mind, we can then partner with an increased pool of RPs, registered providers, to expand the provision of good quality supported housing across the UK. The approach is very much actually a person-centred approach. What we want to do, work with care providers to get the right solution for the individuals to make a real impact for them. We do that providing good quality fit for purpose housing. We will push the ESG, the environmental agenda and the social agenda as much as we can, with outside space as a simple example. We have a very strongly held belief that value should be in the building, not in some sort of artificial lease length, which doesn't actually suit an RP. And the approach is actually across the piece. And obviously just been seeing John doing some excellent work on the extra care side. We're here to complement your existing capital. We're not here to replace Homes England. We're not here to replace all your good work, which you may be doing on your affordable stock. So where you may not have sufficient funds at a certain point in time, there's the opportunity to partner with you. We can say, look, we can expand your supported housing stock. We could create an extra scheme, extra care scheme for you. So if you have a requirement for temporary and emergency accommodation, why don't we sit down, work with you, see if we can help out, satisfy that. Or even, single service user, where we're spending quite a lot of time with the NHS, talking to them about, how we can hopefully help them with adults with more complex care needs. So the approach is across the supported housing market, as we would call it. But I just emphasise we're there to assist, not replace your good work which you're doing. I mentioned the regulator earlier. A key part of this is to respond to the regulator's concerns. We all know some of the practices which have happened in the past. We have nothing to do with that. We won't be working with the RPs who are traditionally looking at long leases. What we want to do is have leases aligned to care packages to remove that mismatch. That enables us to work with highly rated RPs. We want rent set at a lower level and therefore deliver value for money for the public purse. So hopefully that addresses some of your concerns, which may arise when you hear about private capital. We are different. We're different from the approach. We're different from what our beliefs are, and we really want to deliver a long-term solution to help yourselves. So I won't read through each of these areas, but I would just say that BMO has a very wide governance and oversight. It's not just the fund itself, which will be investing the money, looking at the buildings and delivering the solution, working with yourselves. What we'll do as an oversight committee, we will look at the governance all the way through to remove linked parties from the overall solution. And we recognise that we have to respond to where the demand is, what the commissioners want, the care provider wants to get the best outcomes for the individuals. Once that's satisfied, then we will work with a registered provider to ensure that the care providers the appropriate party for that accommodation, and also ensure that housing benefit support is given, so the rents are very transparently set. I mentioned the role of governance, and it's really key to our whole approach. What we want to be doing is creating appropriate accommodation to satisfy local needs. Really important that we deliver resilient housing, operationally efficient homes so they can be run at sensible costs for the end occupier. We do have a wide screening engagement process throughout our business. We will be reporting on the approach we're taking and the impact we're delivering. And here we've aligned our reporting metrics with the Equity Impact Project reporting architecture, which is prepared by Big Society Capital and the Good Economy. Their metrics are very much the same as ours, looking at the supply and provision of units, how we're tackling in the middle of the carbon challenge, how we're going to manage and report on that risk. But it's a partnership. So what we want to know not only what we're doing well with our Net Promoter Score, but we'd actually like to know how we can improve further over a period of time. So who are we? We're here to provide complementary source of capital for lease-based supported housing across a range of areas. We're doing it in a very flexible way to fairly balance the risk between the parties. And this whole model has been done to address regulated social housing's concerns with the sector. But it's not get away from what we really want to do, provide good quality, suitable housing for vulnerable individuals to make a real impact. And basically, we're here to work with your existing teams, or if you want to save time and resource, then we may be able to provide that solution for you. As I said, it's very much an open architecture where we can work together to deliver additional units. On that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to James.
Thank you, Guy. James, you there? You are on mute. Had to happen.
And I'm in the room.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Hopefully you will be able to see my screen. Am I sharing the right screen with everybody? I don't think I am.
Looks good.
Yeah, looks good, James. Go for it.
Can everybody see my slides?
Yep.
Very good. Okay, so my name is James Duncan, and I'm very pleased to be able to say that all of the previous panelists today mentioned in great detail, actually, the importance of partnering in the delivery of housing. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. As my colleague Charlotte introduced me, my main work is acting for institutions who are investing in all different types of residential housing. And what we're going to be briefly talking about today is the methodology and the methods and why institutional investors are increasingly involved in partnering and collaboration for housing delivery. One of the issues that always comes up when partnering with any public authority, be it the NHS, the TfL, et cetera, who obviously often own land which is suitable for housing development, is procurement and state aid issues. A very quick word about the PWLB and what's changed there over the years and why partnering is actually quite useful for various local authorities rather than relying on the old PWLB. Potential government grants. And very briefly at the end, because other people have mentioned it, I just want to talk about for-profit housing associations and what we see is happening in that very interesting market. So without further ado, unlike all my previous panelist presentations, which have lots of nice pictures, lawyers aren't that good at pictures, but as a corporate finance lawyer, this is as good as it gets. Here is a structure chart. Now, I want to debunk a couple of myths about, I should say, and around partnering. Many years ago, and by many years ago, I'd say 15, where there were local authority and private sector capital joint investments in relation to housing. They tended to be quite complicated from a documentation point of view. Complicated documentation means complicated and expensive lawyers, accountants and valuers, and increasingly time. Certainly back then, most of the partnering models, to the extent they existed, where institutional money was coming to the table, was sort of a stripped down PFI scheme, which both discredited now from a political point of view, and also are too complicated to put together. So the modern method of partnering, and I apologise, I will be talking about local authorities as they're the most obvious partnering entity, particularly in this sector in relation to retirement and aged care housing, but it does apply for any other government department, as I mentioned at the beginning. And the idea is these days to make the structure as simple as possible so that everybody can understand it. And as Guy pointed out, I think very succinctly in his presentation, there is a suspicion in the housing world, particularly the affordable housing world, of private capital becoming involved. Local authorities generally can be suspicious of partnering with private capital in all its forms, and that is not justified. And there are many partnering schemes up and running around the country, which are very successful, and certainly those that have been involved in them, generally speaking, have been quite relieved, if that's the right word, but certainly happy with the outcomes around these, partnering structures. So, as you can see on the left here, it needs to be simple and straightforward. So it needs to be flexible as well. So you can have different type of investors putting in equity capital. So by the light blue box I've got there on seed investors would be somebody like BMO and Guy and other people like him, or it could be an institutional investor. It will usually involve the developer, where we're talking about the development of new housings, and obviously our local authority. The first thing I want to say about the local authorities, some local authorities, believe it or not, have cash to invest. However, more likely is that they will have some form of land that they might want to contribute into this structure as their investment. And however that is structured, as I said, quite flexibly, you end up with essentially a joint venture. People call them different things, local authorities call them different things, but at the end of the day, from a legal point of view, it's a relatively straightforward joint venture. So as you can see there, we have our propco that can take various different legal forms, and that will own the land that's being developed. And I've obviously simplified it for the purposes of this, but then essentially on practical completion, the assets are transferred into a clean entity, which is then taken on for long-term investment by the institutions going forward on a sustainable basis, as Guy pointed out. And I don't want to repeat that, so I will continue on. Now, one of the issues for institutional investment is that it usually requires, for them to be interested, quite a large investment, and probably the entry value is 50 million to make it worthwhile, and there are ways and means around that. Now, the idea is, particularly when you're partnering with local authorities for whatever reason, whether it's in the care sector or PRS or retirement or other landholders at the end of the day, we try and only do things once. So just going back, if I go the right way, we have this collaboration and procurement entity, which at the end of the day can be, as the way local authorities like to do it, has a memorandum of understanding, a collection of outcomes and desires in relation to housing and different types of housing. And then that can be a mix of RPs, it could be a mix of institutional investors or other private capital investors, mix of for-profit housing associations and different local authorities. And then the idea is that a framework is developed, And all of those, which is often geographic rather than, but it doesn't have to be based on a geographic area, that the framework can then be introduced. And then as different investors, different land contributors, then can come in on a framework basis, and we create a pipeline whereby all of the legal issues and the structuring is done once on a pre-approved basis, and then we can just roll out the different investments in housing. So the first question legally that I always get asked is local authorities like to sit there and believe that if their involvement, either by way of land contribution or investment, will lead to it being subject to public procurement, the private sector, be they people like BMO and Guy, or the institutional investors, don't like procurement for all sorts of various reasons, mainly time. Normally, the structure can be developed in a very simple way to make sure that it is not a body governed by public law, and instead has a industrial or commercial character. For those of you involved in procurement, you will know that they're the two hallmarks of where a procurement entity comes into play. The collaboration entity itself can achieve different outcomes. It, in some circumstances, can be the entity which appoints the various developers, subcontractors, etc., and actually manages the propco on a non-pecuniary basis from a procurement point of view. However, these days it's actually just simpler if this all just happens in the actual SPV entity that is being invested in. So control, as it says on the title there, is the key. Now, local authorities, and in my experience, and I'm sure many others' experience has been, where a local authority or other public body is engaged or invested in a project or a development, then there is a concern that that public body will want to control that development and entity going forward. Now, for various legal reasons, that is actually the wrong way to look at it. The local authorities, and they've all been encouraged to do so over the last couple of years by setting up various corporate entities. They used to be called HDVs, housing development vehicles, but that became unfashionable. Then the current terminology, depending on where in the company, is local authority trading companies, which is probably a better term from a legal point of view. And they will use that corporate entity to make investments in future housing development sites in all their various forms. And once everybody realizes that the local authority, be its contribution being money or land, it is an investment, and it is for others to sit there and manage the development, either through the development phase and or the long-term investment phase. And as soon as everybody understands that the council is just essentially a passive economic investor only, all of the issues around public oversight and procurement and various other issues are ameliorated to a large extent. Now, that does not mean that council loses all control, which they never would want to do, but they will just sit there and be involved in various key decisions from time to time, which protects their economic investment. The idea being, again, that once these structures are set up with various public bodies, then you can roll out different sites, different developments, and even particularly small developments, which, as Karen said, is really important. You know, sometimes there's more 10 units, or 10 houses, I should say, the word unit is frowned upon, and they this model sort of makes that possible because you can have smaller investments, and then the institutional investors essentially will aggregate a pipeline and come up to the sort of investment criteria they're looking for, which, as I said, sort of starts around 50 million in an ideal world. Okay. As I said at the beginning, the setup takes too long. Once the collaboration entity is set up, other interested partners can come in, sort of test it out without actually making any investment commitment, etc. And then hopefully they will then join the model. New schemes are all dealt with on a framework level, and then control management are all dealt with once, and certain structuring issues which come up from a legal point of view, which can be technical in nature in these sort of structures. For instance, FCA issues around collective investment schemes, accounting issues, Companies Act compliance, particularly dealing with auditors, to sit there and make sure that the joint venture structures are accounted for as joint venture structures is only dealt with once. I think at this point, just noting the time, the idea has been, and I'm sure you've all heard it said for a couple of years now, that there is, quote, walls of money out there by the institutional investors to invest in housing in its various forms. Those walls of money have certainly not crashed onto the beach of housing supply in the way I think people were hoping. And in my general view, there has been various reasons for that. Now, that's not to say there has not been institutional investment. There has been an awful lot. However, particularly for institutional investors, the key thing that an institutional investor is looking for historically was essentially a very long-term investment. And as Guy noted in his presentation, something that is, however you want to structure it, linked to inflation. It's what we call matched liability investment, because the institutions are obviously collecting all of our contributions to our pension funds now, but for some of us, you will not be drawing on that pension fund for many years. And as a consequence for that, your pension contributions going into your fund now need to sit there and keep up with inflation to the point that when you start taking it out, that pound that you put into your pension fund is still worth a pound when you take it out, at least, hopefully more. And as a consequence, leasehold housing has always, and long-term leaseholds, has always been a key investment class for the institutional investors. However, I think around the last couple of years, particularly with leasehold reform, some investors may now see that the market that they traditionally invest in through ground rents of leaseholds, which has now been regulated away, has been a bit tarnished. Now, there is an awful lot of institutional investment in ground rents, and will remain so, even now that the legislation has changed in relation to banning ground rents for more than a peppercorn. That has left a hole in the market for the institutional investors, and ever since, because this has actually been going on since 2015, everybody knew it was coming in one form or another. Probably not as dramatically as has happened in the end of the day, but as I said, this issue is not a new issue. And the institutional investors have now worked out ways to achieve their investment goals in housing through other tenures, which are very important to what we're talking about today. They now like residential, retirement living, and sometimes temporary accommodation, as well as assisted care. They also now are particularly interested in shared ownership, which was always a bit difficult for institutional investors because of the possibility of staircasing, which does muck up their investment profile. But there are structures now which can deal with shared ownership. It's becoming very popular. And as I'm sure all of you know, there has been quite a lot of institutional investment in PRS, private rented sector, or probably more properly labelled build to rent. And all the time, COVID slowed things down a little bit, but all the time they're looking more and more and more at these different housing. And as both Karen and John pointed out, they are very keen to invest in the housing in all of its different forms, including affordable housing, where the economics can work. And that's very helpful going forward in relation to the development of financing, development of housing using a partnering finance model. And what we are seeing is that the institutions now have set up specific entities within themselves to affect this. What is driving that is, as I said, the hole that was left by ground rents, but also, as Guy mentioned, the whole issue of ESG for institutional investors and banks is now critical. They want to be associated with housing. Before ESG came along as the latest buzzword, the city, if you like, decided that housing was classified as infrastructure investment, which at the time they were very excited about because it was seen as socially responsible investment. But we've now moved on into the ESG world, and housing ticks all of those boxes very well. And we're in a bit of a sweet spot, I think, coming up in relation to institutional investment, and they're very keen. And it's, I think, for various participants, be they smaller RPs or smaller private equity houses and smaller or medium-sized developers, to access institutional investors. And this is one of the key issues that we come across all the time, is that they don't quite know how to approach an institutional investor to see how they might be interested. And they can be quite opaque. To actually find the right fund manager or people to speak to within a large institutional organisation can be quite difficult. And I note from Karen's slide at Homes England, they are very good now at fostering those relationships with the potential institutional investors and local authorities for that matter. And on that chart that she had of the various strategic partners, that has unlocked the access to this market very much so. And where the lawyers come in, just going back to my structure chart here, is if we can keep this structure very simple, then the institutional investors are more likely to want to get involved. The issue with institutional investors is because this is patient capital, which will not make a return in the economic sense for many years. At the beginning of these, there is no money to sit there and pay for expensive structured depth types of investment structures, collaborations, and partnering. And so the simpler the better, and the more likely you're going to get it up and running without too much problem. I'm just noticing the time. I just on this slide, the idea of these structures that all, sorry, you can see obviously this slide, I apologise, is obviously written a little while ago. It refers to the HCA. So apologies, Homes England. There's lots of different grants that's still available, and these structures preserve in their different ways, or can preserve in their different ways, your eligibility to sit there and receive grants in the case of affordable housing, as well as PRS guarantees and all the panoply of different systems that's available. The other point is that for non-profit RPs, their involvement in the structure can work quite well. Obviously, RPs, as institutional investors, are not subject to income tax, as we all know, and you can utilise certain methods within the distribution waterfall, as we call it, to sit there and preserve tax-free dividends through the gift aid regime. And all of those matters come together to sit there and be kept simple to encourage institutional investment, to make more investments in all of you and everybody is involved in the wonderful project of developing and delivering more varied and sustainable housing. So thank you very much, and I'll be very interested if any of you have any questions for me later on.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you, everybody. I think we're all getting a bit long in the tooth. I'm harking back to the corporation days in Section 9, but that's definitely showing my age. So thank you for that. Thank you to everybody who's been involved and for those presentations there. We have got some time left, and I know that there's some questions in the Q&A and in the chat box. Really interesting, I thought there. I think sort of two themes I saw coming across. First is that the joint working that everybody's very keen to see and has been promoted across the board from all sides, both from the small to the large. And it was really interesting to see, Karen, from you there, sort of the very the smallest of schemes up to some of the biggest that people have been involved in, and sort of across the board how that's been working. The second sort of theme I saw coming across from that obviously great consensus working, some questions of stigma and stigma evolving in various things. There's a question that came up, or a comment rather, in the Q&A from Libby, firstly regarding what sort of schemes people want to move in. And I think on that, Jeremy and Jerome, there's some work the Jenny panel has done, I know, regarding preparers and preparing people moving into older persons housing. So I wonder if we could share some of that information after this, and sort of the move from people moving from private rented accommodation into social rented accommodation. Quite interesting there. Other stigma regarding within the RP sector against the for-profits, and how people view and perceive those. And also a question that came up, one for Guy, which was regarding stigma for investing in the leasehold structure. So if you're happy to pick that one up, first of all, Guy. So Steve's question is really interesting to hear from Guy, as he says there is a stigma to the leasehold structure the sector has seen to date. How are BMO able to avoid this and still deliver the returns their investors want? He says it all seems too good to be true. What's the catch? So that one over to you.
Okay, there's no catch. We just have a totally different approach in relation to creating the stock and actually working with partners. Some people believe that having a very long lease gives them security. As an organisation, we don't believe that. We believe it creates liabilities for organisations. The best way of creating a sustainable income stream is to actually have really good quality buildings. If you have really good quality buildings, then they're inherently long-term by their very nature. What you don't do is have a poor quality product, put a long lease on it, and suddenly expect there to be value enhanced in that area. Hopefully it's not too good to be true. I think the best way to determine that is, if anyone wants a further conversation, is to take it offline. We can talk through the model in a little bit more detail to make sure that everyone's happy with what the approach is. As I mentioned, we've spent quite a lot of time with the regulator there to ensure that they're happy and it's aligned to all their concerns. And hopefully we can be a fresh new partner within the sector to overcome some of the other issues there. I did see a further question highlighted for me, which was from actually Michael, which was talking about CQC regulations, meaning that care and housing need to be separated. Yeah, we're aware that we are separating. They are separate. We have an arrangement with the registered provider. They obviously have the service level agreement with the care provider. But what we're not doing is burdening the registered provider with another 5, 10, 15 years lease, which they have to sign up to. They can take a long-term lease if they want, but it's got to incorporate the appropriate break clauses so they can get out of that liability if need be. And that rests with us to ensure that we're creating the suitable long-term accommodation to satisfy the individual's needs. So we are aware of the need to separate it, and that's the approach we take.
Lovely, thank you, Guy. And I think that leads neatly on to the second half of the questions I was going to ask. So making sure that everything is suitable for people moving in, which I think possibly leads into again sort of the stigma type question. So John, I don't know if you would be happy to pick this up. So you talked in your piece about the ticking clock for private renters, how individuals they'll be able to cover rent going forward and what would be affordable down the line. who are you speaking to about this? What are you doing about this? What research have you been carrying out at Riverside as to how you, well, firstly, the ability to provide accommodation to all, which is an affordability question for you, I would anticipate. But also how do you think RPs and other providers can get over that stigma type question to encourage people in?
Well, I think the first thing in terms of what we've been doing, we've participated in a number of research projects, including the one that I highlighted in the presentation by Lord Best, to really get underneath and understand what are the issues as we grow older as a population in the UK, and how we can help to meet the needs, because it needs to be a mixed economy. For some people, absolutely home ownership is what they want to continue for the rest of their life, and if they can afford it and if they can find, you know, product that they like, then that's absolutely great. It's for some of those people who either don't have the means, or either rented accommodation, or the other group of people who own their own home in you know, large parts of the north where I'm from, but the value of their home, sometimes a former local authority home, would go nowhere near to buy, you know, a top-end apartment in a retirement living scheme. So it's looking at the different models. And as we said, one thing that we've struggled with, and I know it's worked for some organisations, is the shared ownership or outright sale in a mixed tenure. What we found worked really well is having a social rented scheme with bungalows that surround it so they can use the facilities. So it's looking at different products and different products that work, and also remembering that listening to customers now is really important, but we need to think about the customers of the future as well as the customers today. So looking at keeping rents and service charge affordable, because we've seen in the private sector how service charge for leaseholders has just run away with them, and you know, seeing increases of £200-300 a month, which people simply can't afford. They can't afford when they're working, they certainly can't afford when they're retired. So working really hard to keep affordable housing truly affordable. So there's some of the things that we've been doing, Charlotte.
Okay, thank you for that. Karen, one for you. This is I'm piggybacking, John, on your customers of the future idea there. A question from Steve Secker again. Karen, don't know whether you can answer this, whether you're privy to this information, or if you are, whether you can divulge. Are there any plans for a further CASH funding round? Do you know?
I'm not aware of any. I think we have got ongoing discussions with the department, health and social care, obviously, as well as I will have to say MHCLG for now until I get used to the new acronym. but I think the key thing is to remember that the Affordable Homes programme that is run by the Levelling Up and Housing and Communities side of things definitely includes for homes of different types for older people, for people as they're aging. So I think it's getting away from what the programmes are, working up your schemes, and then talking to my colleagues in terms of, right, I've got this scheme, where's it best fit?
Cool. Thank you. Just a final question. Just want to bring James and Guy in here. Sort of twofold question, really. Whether, sort of direct to James, really, whether for-profits are skirting on the coattails of those who've done all the good work in advance, and whether they are, yes, benefiting from all the charitable endeavours that the housing associations, proper housing associations, may I say, have been doing. And then to link into a question really to Phil, to you, and then to Guy, whether how would investors view private companies with a track record in delivering PRS or student housing, diversifying to the later living, retirement, extra care sector? So again, piggybacking on other people's hard work. James, do you want to go first?
Yes, if I can just take that first bit, I think Guy can probably answer much better the second bit, actually, on the student or similarity of student investment. I think for-profit housing associations have quite a bad name, to be frank, historically. And that is largely because, and the social housing regulator has got very strong views about this, and within the social housing regulator, some people are quite pro for-profit housing as seeing a new source of investment into housing supply, and others are quite anti it. Now, it's the main issue is that I think some for-profit housing associations historically were seen, and probably correctly, as merely finance conduits for using a for-profit housing structure to sit there and just get some of the benefits that housing associations get. And historically that was access to grant in circumstances where at the end of the day, all they were doing is buying existing Section 106 properties from various housing developers, and weren't, as a consequence of that, actually increasing housing supply at all. So they weren't developing their own housing. And so it was just a different funding methodology, which had no real benefit to the supply of housing. That has changed. That any successful for-profit housing company has to demonstrate, as you just said, Charlotte, a good track record, both in relation to developing and funding the development of affordable housing in all of its different forms, and mixed as well. But also, as we've seen, particularly in this sector that affects you, when there was the rush to REITs, particularly for this sort of, for certainly assisted care, was that essentially those investment structures, for-profit housing, whatever you want to call them in their different way, were then outsourcing all the management to somebody else. And when something went wrong, that REIT could sit there and go, it's not my problem, it's who we all outsource to. That is now frowned upon as a model. So they're going to have to demonstrate either a very good partnering model with someone who can provide the care, if it's in this particular sector, or if it's shared ownership or student or whatever, a track record in managing those different tenures. And without it, your for-profit housing association is unlikely, one, to succeed, two, probably won't even get regulated these days, or receive its gong as a for-profit housing association. So things, I think, are getting better, and they're not riding on the coattails of what the housing associations have done successfully for so many years. I think they are now, they're designed to serve a different purpose.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Shall I pick up there?
Please do. Please do.
I appreciate the question being answered, and it's a difficult one because of, from my view, it's all about creating additionality of units, and if we can all work together to create extra units to deliver alternative solutions, because no one size fits all, and I think that's come through quite strongly in the Homes England presentation, the side presentation. People want options, and if there can be a partnership approach to create different options and then new units, then that should be good for everyone. And I very much feel that's the right approach. We've had conversations with a number of registered providers across the space, and we've always said that our approach is that complementary capital, which I was talking about before. We're not trying to replace you in any way, shape or form. This is about how we can provide a solution to help what you're doing in a different way. And I very much want to be sort of thought of as that style of capital, rather than in any way competing with all the hard work the social organisations have been doing for many, many years.
Lovely. Thank you. And I think that brings us to a nicely. There's just one further point made by Tony Oakley, which I think you've actually answered. He was asking about how we did meet the forecasted demand. You've talked there about the additionality of units. So I think just to sum up there, Karen's obviously keen to help you build any additional units you want. John would love some more units if you've got any going. Guy would love to give you some money to help build those, and James can do all the paperwork. So on that note, if I just hand over to Jeremy just to say the final goodbyes, but from me and from WS, thank you very much indeed. That's a fascinating session. Slides will be sent out by the end of this week, so you can watch us all again.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for sharing so eloquently. Really good, and I'm pleased to hear that Poppy, your dog, didn't bark once throughout. So
Don't say anything. There's still time.
So just to echo my thanks and thanks for the HousingLIN. If this is the first time you've joined us for one of our happy hours, we run them every Tuesday afternoon. Do join us next week when we'll be looking at intergenerational housing with Ready Generations and Belong, one of the agencies that I think Libby referred to, who do a lot of PRS and marketing for older adults, over 85s in particular, in PRS. And we'll also be joined by Adrian Hill Architects to talk about the work they've been doing with Metropolitan Thames Valley and Enfield Council about thinking about intergenerational living in the North London Borough. So on behalf of the HousingLIN and everybody who's presented, and thanks ever so much for everybody who's asked questions and commented in the chat box, look forward to seeing you at the next one, and we look forward to partnering with Winckworth Sherwood again too, Charlotte. So great one.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Bye everyone.
Bye.